The restaurant felt like a dream. Warm light spilling across velvet seats, soft jazz wrapping the room in something that almost smelled like comfort. I remember adjusting my bracelet, trying not to grin too wide. 6 years married, and somehow I still wanted to impress him. I'd even booked the table under his name, just so the flowers waiting there would surprise him. Everything looked perfect, exactly the kind of evening I thought we deserved. Daniel smiled across the table, that easy, polished charm that always seemed to win people over. "Yeah, first time," he said when I told him how beautiful the place was. I didn't question it. Why would I? The scent of garlic and Pinot Noir filled the air, candles flickered in rhythm with the music, and for a brief moment, I believed every detail was sincere. Maybe that's what makes betrayal so cruel. It always hides inside moments that feel safe. Then she appeared, the waitress, all smiles and grace. "Would the gentleman like the same wine from the other night?" she asked, like it was nothing. But to me, it was everything. My hand froze around the stem of my glass. The other night? I watched Daniel's face pale, his mouth open just enough to stutter denial. In that instant, the air changed. The music, the candles, even the laughter around us, everything turned cold. "The other night?" I asked, though my voice barely made it past my lips. The waitress smiled, unaware she'd just cracked something wide open. "Yes, sir, the 2016 Pinot Noir. You and your guest really seemed to enjoy it." Her words dropped one by one, slow and heavy, like stones into deep water. Daniel's eyes darted toward me, then back to her, then down at his napkin. "Oh, you must be mistaken," he said, laughing too fast. "I wasn't here." The waitress hesitated, confusion clouding her face. "I'm sorry, sir, but I remember you clearly. You were sitting right over there by the window." She even pointed, like proof, like fate helping her remember. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced a smile, pretending to sip my wine, pretending I wasn't about to shatter right there under those warm restaurant lights. Daniel sat still, jaw tight, pretending too. I stared at him, my reflection trembling in the dark glass of my drink. "First time here," he'd said. The same lips that kissed me that morning now lied so easily. The candles flickered, the music kept playing, but something between us went silent, dead silent. I smiled again because that's what you do when the truth starts whispering before you're ready to hear it. After that moment, the dinner became something else entirely. A performance neither of us rehearsed. He talked about work, about some new project, his voice steady but hollow. I nodded, smiled, even laughed once or twice, the way a woman does when she's not ready to admit what she already knows. Every sound in that restaurant felt amplified. The clink of cutlery, the whisper of fabric, the hum of secrets unraveling. Inside, my thoughts spun like storm clouds. Who was she? The guest who shared his favorite wine? My husband had always been careful, private, maybe even a little mysterious. I used to think it was part of his charm. Now I saw it for what it was. A shield. I watched his hands move, confident as ever, cutting steak, pouring wine, pretending. And I wondered how long I'd been living inside his fiction. By dessert, I couldn't taste a thing. The sweetness was gone, replaced by something metallic, sharp, like the aftertaste of truth. He smiled across the table, asking if I was okay. I told him I was fine. Women like me say that all the time. But that night, when I looked into his eyes, I stopped seeing my husband. I saw a stranger sitting where love used to live, and I knew I wouldn't let this go quietly. The drive home after that dinner should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The silence between us had a pulse of its own, steady, heavy, impossible to ignore. Daniel tried to fill it with small talk, like patching holes in a sinking ship. I kept my gaze fixed on the window, watching the city blur by. He thought if we just kept moving, the truth might stay behind. But I carried it home with me, sitting right there in the passenger seat. The next few days felt off, like we were dancing around something invisible. He'd smile too easily, hold me a little too long, ask too many casual questions. Guilt has a rhythm. I could hear it in his voice, see it in his forced calm. I answered softly, played along, but inside, I was replaying every detail. The waitress's tone, the way his eyes flinched, the table by the window she pointed to. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a map. By the time the weekend came again, I'd made up my mind. I needed to know for sure, not from his mouth, but from the place itself. So I went back to that restaurant alone, wearing the same perfume, the same earrings. The hostess recognized his last name immediately. "Table by the window?" she asked. My heart stuttered. I smiled and said, "Yes, please." Because this time I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to remember. I sat at that same table, facing the same view, city lights flickering like they were winking at a secret I hadn't been invited to. The seat across from me felt haunted, as if someone had just gotten up and left. I traced the rim of my glass with my fingertip, feeling that fine edge between rage and restraint. When the waitress came over, her smile softened with recognition. I could tell she remembered him before I even asked. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "That man, Daniel, he's my husband. Was he really here before?" For a second she hesitated, glancing around as if checking who might hear. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I don't want to cause trouble, but yes. About 2 weeks ago, he came with a woman, blonde, tall. They shared dessert." Her voice trembled slightly. Mine didn't. I thanked her, tipped her well, and took a slow sip of wine to steady my shaking hands. The glass felt cold against my lips, colder than I expected. My reflection stared back. Not angry yet, just changed. I'd always believed that betrayal announces itself loudly, but no, it arrives quietly, wearing perfume and polite smiles. That night, I realized I'd crossed an invisible line. I wasn't just the wife anymore. I was the observer, and he had no idea I was already taking notes. When I left the restaurant, the night air felt sharper than usual, like the city itself knew something I didn't want to say out loud. I walked slowly, clutching my purse close, letting every sound sink in. The hum of traffic, the clinking of glasses behind me, the faint scent of rain. He'd lied so easily. The thought burned through me like acid. And yet, I didn't cry. Not yet. I was saving that for later. Maybe never. At home, Daniel greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He asked how work had been, how my day went. His tone was light, practiced. I answered just as smoothly, playing along like we were both actors who'd forgotten the script. He kissed my forehead, thanked me for dinner the other night, and went back to his laptop. I studied the curve of his shoulders, familiar, steady, and wondered how much of him was still real. That night, as I lay awake, I couldn't stop replaying the waitress's words. "You and your guest really seem to enjoy it." The scene looped in my mind until it no longer hurt. It just clarified. I stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible patterns with my eyes. If he could perform a lie so well, I could learn to play his game even better. The first rule: never let him know I'd already started. The night it finally came to the surface, rain had just started to fall, slow, steady, like the world was trying to calm me down. Daniel drove in silence, both hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. The wipers moved in rhythm with my heartbeat, back and forth, wiping away nothing that really mattered. He cleared his throat, glanced at me, and said, "You're quiet." I wanted to laugh at the irony of it. Quiet was safer than truth. "I'm just thinking," I said, staring out at the streaks of light blurring across the window. He nodded, pretending not to feel the weight sitting between us. "About the wine?" he asked, trying to sound casual. My fingers twisted in my lap. "About how you remembered every detail of our anniversary," I said, "except the truth." The words slipped out softer than I intended, not sharp, just tired, like disappointment finally had a voice. He sighed, that long, exasperated kind of sigh men use when they're cornered. "You're reading too much into this," he said. "It was a client meeting, all right? A business dinner." My eyes stayed on the rain. At a romantic restaurant, with wine and dessert. His knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "It wasn't like that," he said. And in that moment, I realized something. Guilt always yells louder than innocence ever needs to. He gripped the wheel tighter, eyes fixed on the road, the glow of passing streetlights flickering across his face like a bad confession. "Then why lie, Daniel?" I asked, my voice steady, too steady. He didn't answer. He just blinked hard, jaw locked, pretending to focus on the traffic. The silence grew until it filled the car, pressing against the windows, against my chest. That's when I realized he wasn't just hiding the truth. He was protecting it. The rest of the drive felt endless, like every red light was conspiring to make us sit with what neither of us would say. I counted the seconds between his breaths, the faint sound of rain tapping against the roof. He cleared his throat once, twice, searching for the right lie to end the night with. When he finally spoke, it was small, almost fragile. "You're making something out of nothing." I almost pitied him. Almost. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the rain slowed to a drizzle, as if even the sky was exhausted. He turned off the engine, but didn't move. Neither did I. The smell of wet asphalt filled the silence between us. He looked at me then, eyes tired, scared, maybe even sorry. "Can we just forget it?" he asked. I smiled faintly, unbuckled my seatbelt, and opened the door. "Of course," I said. "Forgetfulness seems to be your specialty." That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, listening to the rhythm of his breathing beside me. Steady, peaceful, almost arrogant. It amazed me how easily he could rest after turning my world inside out. The ceiling felt endless, the room too quiet. My mind kept returning to the sound of the waitress's voice, looping over and over until it became part of the darkness. Every repetition carved the truth a little deeper. By morning, he was cheerful again, humming while he made coffee, pretending the night before hadn't happened. I watched him move around the kitchen like a man rehearsing normalcy, every gesture too practiced, too deliberate. "We're okay, right?" he asked, brushing a kiss against my cheek. I smiled. "Of course," I said. But inside, something had shifted. Trust had turned into observation, and love had learned to stay quiet. As he left for work, I stood at the window, watching him disappear down the street. The rain had stopped, but puddles still mirrored the gray sky. In his reflection on the glass, I saw what I hadn't noticed before. Not just a liar, but a man confident he'd never be caught. And that's when I knew the silence between us had a purpose. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And soon I'd let him hear it speak. The days that followed were a strange kind of calm, the kind that comes before a storm you secretly hope will hit. Daniel thought the silence meant forgiveness, that my soft tone and polite smiles were signs I'd moved on. He didn't realize they were camouflage. I began staying late at work, answering texts slower, creating space that he didn't even notice growing wider. I wanted him comfortable. Comfortable people don't see danger coming. Each night, I'd pour a glass of wine and sit with my laptop, scrolling through receipts, bank statements, reservations, all the little trails careless men leave behind. And there it was, the restaurant, the same table by the window, under his name. Twice. 2 different dates. I remember staring at the screen for a long time, not angry, not broken, just awake. There's something empowering about seeing proof. It turns pain into purpose. By midweek, I had a plan. Simple, poetic, perfectly cruel in its elegance. I called the restaurant and booked the same table again, under his name, of course. Then I called a mutual friend at his office and made sure his boss would get an invitation to join a dinner Daniel supposedly organized. Everything lined up easily, almost too easily. Maybe fate has a sense of humor after all. That evening, I dressed the way I did on our anniversary. Black dress, soft curls, subtle perfume. The mirror didn't show the same woman, though. There was something steadier in her eyes, something colder. When Daniel got home, I greeted him with a smile so sweet it could have fooled an angel. "I thought we could go back to that restaurant," I said. "Maybe relive the magic." His hesitation lasted only a second, Guilt makes people obedient. He agreed, of course. He always did when things didn't make sense. On the drive there, he tried to sound casual, asking about my day, brushing his thumb over my hand. I played along beautifully, like an actress in a role she'd perfected. The restaurant looked the same. Glowing lights, soft music, the faint scent of vanilla and oak. I watched him settle into the seat by the window, unaware he was sitting in the very place his story would end. We ordered dinner, shared polite laughter, clinked glasses. I could almost admire his ability to pretend. Halfway through, I noticed the door open and a familiar face walk in. His boss. He spotted Daniel immediately, smiling wide as he approached our table. "Daniel, I didn't expect to see you here, especially after last time." My pulse didn't race. It simply waited. Daniel froze when his boss reached our table. "Didn't you bring someone else before?" the man asked, glancing between us with harmless curiosity. Harmless. What a word. I could almost feel Daniel's heartbeat from across the table, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his napkin. "You must be mistaken," he said, voice cracking on the last word. His boss frowned, confused but certain. "No, I remember. She was blonde." I smiled, setting my wine glass down with slow precision. "Another blonde, right?" I said softly, meeting his boss's eyes first, then Daniel's. The boss blinked, realizing too late that he'd walked straight into something private and irreversible. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed again, no sound escaping. I leaned back, every movement deliberate. "Thank you for confirming that, sir," I said, still calm. I was starting to think I'd imagined it. The silence that followed was exquisite, heavy, pure, undeniable. His boss muttered an apology and walked away, leaving us alone in the wreckage of Daniel's reputation. He tried to speak, but the words died on his tongue. I lifted my glass, taking one slow sip of the same Pinot Noir. The taste was sharp this time, bitter, satisfying. Across from me, Daniel's eyes begged for mercy. Mine promised none. The moment we stepped outside, Daniel's mask finally cracked. The night air hit us like cold glass, sharp and merciless. "You embarrassed me in front of my boss," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the empty parking lot. I turned to face him, the glow from the restaurant catching on the tear in his composure. "You embarrassed yourself," I said, calm as ever, "when you made me your alibi." He blinked hard, like he couldn't believe I'd say it out loud. He tried again, desperate now. "It was just a mistake." "A mistake?" I cut in. "A mistake doesn't book dinner for two, Daniel." My words landed softly, but they sliced just the same. The irony of it all almost made me laugh. How easily he'd traded loyalty for a few hours of thrill. He looked smaller that night, like the weight of truth had stolen inches from him. It wasn't anger I felt anymore. It was clarity. At home, the silence stretched long enough to become its own language. I went to the bedroom, opened the drawer where I'd hidden everything, the receipts, the screenshots, the reservation confirmation. When I handed him the folder, his hand shook. "You know what's poetic?" I said, my voice steady as glass. "You ordered the same wine twice, the first time for her, the second time for me, your last dinner with me." He looked at me like a man realizing his own reflection for the first time. Pale, desperate, unfamiliar. "You're leaving me?" he whispered, as if the words might sound softer if said quietly. I shook my head. "No, Daniel," I said. "You left me the night you toasted another woman at that table." His mouth opened, but there was nothing left to defend. You can't reason with someone who already knows the whole script. He dropped onto the couch, holding the folder like it might burn him. The paper slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the floor. Receipts, messages, proof. Each page told the same story, just in different fonts. I stood there watching, not because I wanted him to hurt, but because I needed him to see what truth looks like when it stops hiding. It's not loud. It's devastatingly quiet. He tried one last apology, the kind that tastes like panic. "It didn't mean anything. he said, his voice cracking under its own weight. I smiled faintly. Then neither will this, I said, gesturing toward the life we'd built. The furniture, the framed photos, the rings. I walked past him, collected my purse, and headed for the door. His voice followed, trembling. Mine didn't. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't even look back. Some endings don't need noise. They just need distance. The night air was cool against my skin, the sky heavy with unshed rain. My heels clicked on the pavement, steady, measured. Each step felt like punctuation to a sentence I'd been rewriting in secret. He'd written the betrayal, I'd written the ending. And finally, I liked my version better. As I reached the car, I caught my reflection in the window. Eyes clear, face calm, lips slightly curved. Not in joy, but in release. For the first time in months, I wasn't replaying what he'd said or what I'd missed. I was thinking about what came next. Freedom, I realized, doesn't roar. It hums quietly in your chest until you decide to listen. And that night, I finally did. Inside the house behind me, I imagined him still sitting there, surrounded by the debris of his lies, the ghost of our laughter, the smell of wine that had lost its sweetness. Maybe he'd pour another glass. Maybe he'd curse my name. Maybe he'd just sit in silence. It didn't matter. His story ended there. Mine didn't. Months later, I found myself back at the same restaurant, the one that had once stolen my breath. This time I arrived alone. The air felt lighter, the music softer, like the universe had changed the soundtrack just for me. I sat by the window where truth had once ruined my appetite and ordered dinner without hesitation. The world looked different from this seat now. Not smaller, not lonelier, just mine again. The waitress approached, the same one who'd unknowingly unstitched my marriage. Her smile was warmer this time, less apologetic. "Would you like the same wine, ma'am?" she asked kindly. I smiled back, tracing the stem of my glass. "No, thank you," I said. "I think I'll try something new." Her eyes softened, as if she understood more than I'd said. And maybe she did. Some women always do. As I lifted my glass, the city lights shimmered in the reflection, tiny flickers of a future that didn't scare me anymore. The wine tasted bright, sharp, clean, honest. I let the moment stretch, savoring it. Then quietly, I spoke the truth out loud, not for anyone else, but for me. He taught me that lies age like cheap wine, but truth only gets stronger with time.